Welcome to the deep dive. We're digging into a whole stack of sources this time.
Yeah, it's been a pretty eventful period.
Absolutely. We're focusing on the global crypto scene, specifically news and developments from May 25th right through to June 1st, 2025.
And the plan is, well, pretty straightforward. We take all this information, articles, notes, research, break it down, and pull out what you really need to know.
Think of it as your fast track to getting up to speed on the big shifts in crypto policy, the markets, all that stuff happening worldwide.
Exactly. Saves you wading through it all yourself.
And believe me, the sources we looked at cover some, frankly, surprising political turns, new regulations popping up, some significant market reactions, and even specific altcoins making moves.
So, should we dive in? The sources really paint a picture of major shifts happening all at once across different countries, and the U.S. is, well, right in the thick of it.
Yeah, starting with what seems like a really big turnaround from President Trump. I mean, the sources highlighted this major shift, right? From being pretty skeptical in the past to now being quite the crypto advocate.
It's a notable change, and the sources mention concrete actions too. Things like administration investments in digital assets.
And that huge plan from the Trump family media company, what was it, $2.5 billion to buy Bitcoin?
That's the figure mentioned, yeah, a very substantial amount. Plus, the sources talked about revoking previous restrictions.
And even introducing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. That sounds pretty official.
It does. Now, it's important we mention the sources also noted concerns being raised about, potential conflicts of interest.
Right, because of the family's direct business involvement.
Mm-hmm.
The sources definitely flagged that concern.
Yep, it was in the material. And staying with the U.S., there was another signal, this time on the regulatory side.
The SEC dropping the Binance lawsuit.
Exactly. The sources pointed to that as a potential significant shift in their enforcement stance. Lots of people reading into that one.
And there's legislative movement, too. The sources cover the House introducing the Clarity Act, Digital Asset Market Clarity Act.
Right, aiming for a proper regulatory framework, trying to bring some formal structure.
So when you put all these U.S. pieces together, the presidential support, the reserve idea, the SEC move, this new act, what's the takeaway?
Well, it strongly suggests, based on these sources, that U.S. federal policy might be heading in a very different direction compared to the last few years. It feels more coordinated, perhaps.
Interesting. But it's not just the U.S. making noise, is it? The sources show this is happening globally.
Oh, absolutely. There's momentum building elsewhere, too. Like over in the U.K., the sources mentioned Nigel Farage.
Ah, yes. Proposing a crypto revolution if Reform UK gets into power.
That's the term used in the source, yeah. A crypto revolution.
So what does that actually mean, according to the sources? What are the plans?
Well, the specifics mentioned include integrating crypto much more into the mainstream economy. And they talked about a proposed 10% capital gains tax on crypto.
Okay, specific tax rate. Anything else?
And kind of mirroring the U.S. talk, establishing a national Bitcoin reserve, but this one within the Bank of England.
A reserve in the Bank of England.
Yeah.
That's quite something. And speaking of national reserves, Pakistan made a big splash, didn't they?
Huge announcement, according to the sources. It came from Bilal bin Saqib, identified as CEO of the Pakistan Crypto Council and Minister of Crypto and Blockchain at Bitcoin 2025 in Vegas.
And what was the announcement exactly?
Pakistan is planning its own national Bitcoin reserve. They apparently intend to hold it in a national wallet with, and this is key, no plans to sell, signaling a really long-term commitment.
Wow. Not just buying, but holding. And the energy commitment mentioned in the sources, that seemed massive, too.
It really did. The sources stated Pakistan plans to allocate 2,000 megawatts of power specifically for Bitcoin mining, and interestingly, AI data centers, too. That's industrial scale.
That's a serious backing. So you've got Pakistan going big on reserves and mining, the UK proposing reserves and taxes. What about other places? India was mentioned too, right?
Yeah, India's approach seems maybe more measured based on the sources. They're expected to release a discussion paper in June 2025.
A discussion paper. So laying out options for regulating crypto assets rather than a firm plan yet.
Exactly. So you see this real mix, don't you? Pakistan all in, UK with specific proposals, India taking a step back to discuss policy first.
What does this variety tell us, this global kind of patchwork?
I think it highlights just how differently countries are trying to figure out this whole decentralized tech thing. There's no single playbook. Some are clearly making strategic bets, accumulating assets, building infrastructure, maybe aiming for future influence.
While others are moving more cautiously on the regulatory front.
Precisely. It feels like a global scramble, everyone trying to find the best national strategy in this new landscape.
And it's not just national governments either. Crypto's weaving into local politics too. The sources brought up that situation with NYC Mayor Eric Adams, right?
Yeah, the taxpayer-funded trip to the Bitcoin convention in Vegas. The sources detailed how he hosted a fundraising luncheon during that trip.
Using a QR code for campaign donations from crypto folks attending.
That's what the sources described. And they also mentioned that this raised some eyebrows, concerns about blurring the lines between official city business and, campaign fundraising.
Right, the ethical questions that pop up.
Exactly. It's just an interesting example, noted in the source material, of how crypto is intersecting with politics at all levels now, and the kind of scrutiny that can bring.
Okay, so that covers the policy and politics side, quite a bit happening there. How did the markets actually react to all this, according to the sources?
Well, Bitcoin had a pretty dramatic week. The sources reported it actually hit a new all-time high.
What was the number?
$111,970. A big milestone.
Wow. But it didn't stick, did it?
No. The sources noted it then dipped back, falling below $108,000.
And what was the trigger for that drop, according to the sources?
Interestingly, one factor cited was President Trump's suggestion of a 50% tariff on the EU. That seemed to ripple out and unsettle broader global markets, including crypto.
So even with all the positive adoption news like national reserves being announced, something like a tariff comment can still push Bitcoin down from its peak.
It seems so. It really highlights how crypto markets, despite maturing, are still plugged into and affected by these larger macroeconomic and geopolitical events. It's not totally insulated.
But the overall trend is still up.
Oh yeah, the sources made sure to add context. Even with that pullback, Bitcoin was apparently still up over 50% over the past year. So perspective is important.
Okay. What about Ethereum? Did the sources say much about ETH during this time?
Yeah, Ethereum actually showed notable strength according to the reports. It rose past $2,700.
And what was driving that? Was it the same factors as Bitcoin?
Not entirely. The reasons highlighted in the sources were more specific to Ethereum, like heightened demand for Ethereum futures contracts, and also significant inflows from institutional investors.
Ah, so institutional money coming in.
That seems to be a key driver mentioned. There were even analyst predictions noted in the sources suggesting ETH could potentially break $3,000 in June if that buying pressure kept up.
Interesting. So its strength seemed a bit more independent of Bitcoin's roller coaster ride during that specific period, driven by its own market dynamics.
That's the impression given by the sources, yeah. Different assets, different stories playing out sometimes.
Makes sense. And beyond the big two, the sources also flagged some altcoins. Things to watch.
Yes, a few got mentioned as showing positive signs heading into June. SUI was one, apparently nearing $4 after recovering from a hack issue.
Okay. Get the other?
HYPE, PI, DOT, and FET-T were also named in the material as gaining attention and showing some positive momentum.
So why should someone listening pay attention to these smaller altcoins, especially when there's so much big news around Bitcoin and policy?
Well, the potential upside with altcoins can be much higher, though. Importantly, so is the risk. Their prices often move based on very specific things: project updates, new tech releases, niche trends within crypto itself. The sources were just pointing these specific ones out as having some buzz during that week.
Gotcha. Higher risk, potentially higher reward, tied to project specifics.
Yeah.
And finally, the sources looked ahead a bit, didn't they? Mentioning June as a key month.
Right. They flagged some big upcoming events, things like Money 2020 Europe in Amsterdam starting June 3rd, and the NFC Summit 25 in Lisbon on June 4th.
Right. Big industry gatherings.
Exactly. And these kinds of events can definitely sway market sentiment, Announcements get made, regulators speak, partnerships form. It can all influence trading trends.
Brings everyone together: leaders, regulators, innovators. Makes sense they'd be watched closely.
Absolutely. They can set the tone for the next phase.
Okay, so let's just take a breath and recap. We've seen sources covering national Bitcoin reserves being set up, huge energy commitments for mining.
Major regulatory shifts signaled in the U.S., like the SEC move and the Clarity Act.
Ambitious political talk in the UK, cautious policy steps in India.
Even crypto intersecting with local politics and fundraising ethics.
Market-wise, Bitcoin hitting a new high, but pulling back on macro news.
Ethereum showing strength, driven by futures and institutional interest.
And specific altcoins like SUI, HYPE, PI, DOT, FET getting noticed.
Plus, key industry events coming up in June. It's a lot.
It really is. It feels undeniable, looking at all this source material, that the whole global crypto landscape is just evolving incredibly rapidly. It's moving deeper into mainstream finance and, crucially, into geopolitics.
Yeah, the lines are definitely blurring. It's not just a niche tech thing anymore. It's interacting at the highest levels.
So here's something to think about, based on everything we've just unpacked from these sources. You see these really diverse, sometimes conflicting global approaches emerging, right?
Definitely. From countries actively building reserves and mining power to others focusing more on tax rules and others just trying to figure out the local political ethics.
So the final thought for you is this. How might these very different strategies, the aggressive adoption versus the cautious regulation versus the political navigation, how might they ultimately shape the future power dynamics of this whole decentralized tech world on a global scale? What does this flurry of varied activities suggest about where you should really focus your attention to understand what's coming next?
That's the big question, isn't it? A lot to keep an eye on.